Welcome and thank you for joining us. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Teresa Strong. Dr. Teresa Strong received her PhD in medical genetics from the University of Alabama at Birmingham and completed postdoctoral studies with Dr. Francis Collins at the University of Michigan. Dr. Strong has been one of the founding members of the Foundation for Prader-Willi Research and directs the Foundation for Prader-Willi Research Grants Program since its inception. She is going to present on behalf of Dr. Jessica Bohanowicz, who cannot be here today. And this presentation will report the results from an important FPWR survey evaluating the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Prader-Willi syndrome families. So thank you, Dr. Strong, and please welcome me in joining her.
Thank you so much, and thank you for allowing me to step in and present for Jessica. I'm going to talk about the impact of the COVID-19 quarantine stay-at-home orders on families. And this is data that was collected through the global PWS syndrome registry, which hopefully many of our families are members of. So just a word about the Global PWS Registry. This is a community-wide resource that was launched in 2015. We have about 2,000 PWS participants, mainly from the US, but from many other countries. And this is a repository where parents or guardians report data about their loved one with PWS. And this is an IRB approved study. It is the platform is on the National Organization for Rare Disorders platform. So that the I Am Rare registries has a number of rare disease registries. They were developed with input of the FDA. There's a collaboration ongoing with the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator at the Critical Path Institute. So it's a very nice platform for us to be involved in. The registry investigators are shown there, myself, along with Dr. Miller and McCandless. And we also have an advisory board, which consists of a couple of parents, some representatives of patient groups, including the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association, as well as some academicians. And their goal is to make sure that we're collecting and using the data in accordance with, in ways that will help the community. So the goals of the registry, as it's been developed, are to develop a comprehensive database of individuals with PWS so that we can better understand the full characteristics associated with PWS. It also allows us to support and expedite clinical trial completion, determine areas of needed research, and help develop standards of care. The overall goal, though, is to improve the lives of those affected by PWS. So a little bit about the platform. As I said, there's some really nice features of the platform. So this is a series of web-based surveys that the parent or guardian typically completes. And there's some nice things like every time you complete a survey, you can see the aggregated data. So see how your answers compare to the rest of the community. And we have a number of surveys covering everything from birth history and specifics of ears, nose, and throat to behavior and psychiatry and some quality of life questions. And one really nice feature of the NORD platform is that as a rare disease community, we can come up with new surveys and we can pretty flexibly add those as needed. And so that is what, when the COVID pandemic hit, we were aware of a very nice survey by the International PWSO organization about individuals with PWS who had gotten COVID. But we, FPWR, along with PWSA, were really interested in how is the lockdown and how are the uncertainties of COVID affecting our loved ones with PWS and also their families. So we developed some questions to look at the impact of the stay-at-home orders on families, including how they were navigating their medical care, their therapies, and their education. And that launched in May of 2020, and we collected data through August. So it was really that first period in which the lockdown occurred. So we had a total of about 350 families participate, and not surprisingly, caregivers reported more stress during this time. So there were a few people who reported less stress, but the vast majority had a little bit or a lot higher of stress, and more caregivers than not reported less sleep during this time as well. We also asked about what were the concerns for the caregiver of the person with PWS, as well as the concerns of the person with PWS. And these were somewhat different. So caregivers were really worried that their loved one with PWS was going to get COVID. They were also worried that they might get COVID and then not be able to take care of their loved one with PWS. On the other hand, individuals with PWS were more concerned about the changes to their schedule and the uncertainty. When were they going to go back to school? When were they going to be able to see their friends, for example? We also asked some questions about distance learning, since all of our kids here in the US went into a distance learning mode. And most families felt like their person with PWS responded well to the distance learning, but there were some families who really struggled during that time. The majority of individuals also felt like it took more time than they expected to be completing the schoolwork that their child with PWS was receiving. We also asked about access to medical care, and it was good to see that the majority of individuals felt like they were getting medical care, usually through telehealth. They were getting their prescriptions, but the same was certainly not true for their therapies. So physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy were all severely impacted over the course of the pandemic. And we also asked about managing behavior. For the majority of individuals, it was about the same or harder to manage the behavior of the person with PWS. A small group found it easier, maybe because there was less pressure and less need to get to scheduled events. And then we kind of broke that down a little bit more, looking at, was it harder, easier, or about the same for a number of different behaviors and activities. So overall, again, what we saw was more difficulty than less in increased anxiety, food seeking, temper outbursts, and self-injurious behaviors. But a point which is quite relevant, in fact, for the clinical trials that were ongoing, is that, you know, it really varied by families. So many families found it more difficult, but there were families who found it easier. So it was really an unpredictable impact across individual families. The amount of sleep largely stayed the same. Physical activity really varied. Some people had more, some people had less. But the social activity was very similar to the general population in that almost everybody had less social interaction. So the summary of this survey, and we really appreciate everybody who participated and could give us some information about how COVID was impacting their families. Like everybody during the pandemic, individuals with PWS and their caregivers experienced significant disruptions. Caregivers reported generally increased stress. I mean, they were taking on a lot of additional responsibilities. They were helping their child with schooling, perhaps. They were being the physical therapist, the speech therapist. So it was a lot more pressure on parents, I think, as the activity coordinators. I mean, we're activity coordinators for our kids anyway, but it just kind of ramped that up. The decreased social opportunities, the uncertainty of when you were going to get to visit family and friends was very difficult for our loved ones with PWS. But for a minority, things were easier. So the impact was not the same across everyone. Parents cited the stress associated with the transition and the uncertainty as really difficult for their loved ones with PWS. So I'll just end by saying to our families, if you're not part of the global PWS registry, we would really appreciate having you join and sharing your experience with PWS. It helps us build a really robust database in which we can understand what is impacting our community. We have an email that you can, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer those. And we have, again, for those researchers who may be listening, we have a policies for doing research within the registry or getting de-identified data out of the registry to better understand clinical or psychological or behavioral aspects of PWS. So we really appreciate those families who have participated to date and hope to welcome some more.
Fantastic talk. Thank you so much. We can accept some more questions in the chat. I'm monitoring the chat. We just have some comments that folks have seen some changes in their nephews and family members due to the COVID crisis. And I know I did some surveillance of our methadone population, which is a very different population, and I did a lot of reading on this. And we noticed some gender differences with younger women being, having a lot more pressure on them as a select demographic because of, they're in ages and levels where they have young kids and jobs that are affected. And I'm wondering if you noticed some gender-based differences that way.
We did not. I will say that most of the respondents are moms, but that would be interesting to look at. And we also have data on ages. And so we could go back and look how it breaks down for school age versus older kids, for example. That's a good question. And, for this analysis, we really focused on the US experience. As I said, it is a global registry. And so we do have data from other countries as well. But, because the timing was such, we wanted a more homogeneous group. So this is really reporting on mainly the US participants.
Well, and that's right, because things were changing so rapidly at that time, and one part of the country would have totally different effects. So it would be very interesting to see a cross comparison of timeline and changes. And if you can do a follow-up survey, maybe to assess whether or not they're still stressed or if it's returned to normal to some degree at this point.
Yes, true, because as we know, our kids with PWS don't always transition well. So, this was the transition into the COVID period, and it'd be interesting to see how they're transitioning out of the COVID period as well.
Very good. Dr. Pochi, do you have any questions?
Really just a lot of enthusiasm for the study. I just can't help but think there's going to be just so many questions that can be asked, and just to get a much better picture of things relating to patients and families. I think with respect to the pandemic, I would just echo the comments about monitoring things longitudinally. I think that's a strong approach, and you can help target different segments of our community that have different issues and are facing different challenges. So just a lot of enthusiasm for the project.
Well, thank you. And as I mentioned, we have about 2,000 participants. And so we are able to look at things over a long period of time, which is really a benefit. You'll hear from Lisa Matesevec later about, we have a prospective study ongoing that has about 650 participants looking at behavior and serious medical events in this group. So really the strength of the registry, I think, is that it does aggregate data from so many individuals in our community. So we can really hopefully get a broad understanding of the spectrum of challenges that families face, and that can be helpful as people are navigating PWS to understand, what are the things that other people are either struggling with or doing well with. The registry also includes information about medications and supplements. So what are families using, and is it benefiting? Do they feel like they're getting benefit from it? So we have a lot of projects. And again, one of the nice things is if there are particular questions of interest, we can add surveys and really drill down into some of the aspects that are of interest to the clinical community about some of these features. And we can also upload files, medical files, so parents report information, but that reporting can be complemented by medical that can be added to the registry and stored there. So for our families, hopefully it is a good record of all of the medical care that individuals have received, and the opportunity to share that with clinicians to ask research questions.
Yeah, that's what if you see me looking to the side, it's because I'm checking the chat line and the Q&A. And one of the things were the medical consequences and the vulnerabilities, obviously. COVID-19 selectively impacted certain people with characteristics such as overweight and diabetes and things like that. And I think there's a natural interest and concern about the vulnerability, and if you've gotten any information on how bad it was for our population, really.
You know, so as I mentioned, Tony Holland was heading a survey from IPSO, and you know, he would be the person who would be able to report on that. I know they had recorded a number of cases across the world. So, you know, as you're probably aware, there are some populations, Down syndrome, for example, that were particularly susceptible to the impact of COVID. Tony would have that data. I don't know that that was the case with PWS, but certainly I think the concerns with there being more overweight and obesity in the population was definitely a concern.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, thank you so much. I think we, let's see, we have one question on data that younger siblings and the impact on younger siblings.
You know, the impact of PWS on siblings, of course, is a really interesting question to us overall. In this particular survey on the COVID lockdown, we didn't look at that aspect. But again, you know, one of the advantages of the registry is that we can add studies to it. And I think, you know, we've done studies on the impact of PWS on caregivers and have seen that caregivers are under a tremendous amount of stress even prior to COVID lockdown. And then that stress, which was already quite high, went even higher. So I think asking questions in the future about the impact on siblings, either with COVID or just in the general situation, is a really interesting way to go, and one that we hope to pursue.
Fantastic. I think if there are no other questions, Dr. Poche, do you have any other questions? We can end the session early and move on to the next presentation. Do you have anything else to add?
No, just again, thank you very much. You're very promising project, and we wish you the best.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks so much.